We are now joined by Mr. Stephen Sackur. He is presenter of BBC Hard Talk and is moderating a one-on-one with Jean-Claude Trichet at this year's Gallen Symposium. Mr. Sackur, thank you very much for granting us some of your time.
It's a pleasure to be here.
In a nutshell, what is your resume of your discussion with the former president of the European Central Bank? And did you leave the conversation with more optimistically regarding the future of Europeans' monetary policy?
Well, the focus of our discussion was, of course, the risks facing the Eurozone right now. I put it to Mr. Trichet, who's one of the architects of the common currency, of Europe's current architecture. I put it to him that maybe he'd misjudged the risks that came with the creation of the euro. And frankly, our discussion was really a question of him trying to explain to me that no, the system was still viable, was still, in essence, working well, and me questioning that by looking at reality. So if you ask me whether I'm more optimistic or pessimistic as a result of the conversation, I'd say that I'm not more optimistic. I feel that those people who are passionately committed to the euro are mixing their economic analysis with a deep political commitment and a wish, a desire to see Europe move to ever further integration. Whether that can happen in the current circumstances, I have my doubts. And I think, if we all come back in a year's time, we may find that that key question, can the Eurozone survive in its current form, has been answered, and it may have been answered in the negative.
Having talked to a lot of outstanding and controversial leaders of today, is there a correlation between a person's power and its attitude towards risk-taking?
I don't know that there's a direct correlation. I mean, I suppose all one can say is that as people acquire more power, the risks they take become much more significant and affect a far greater number of people. One of the interesting panel discussions that I enjoyed today was about the ethics of risk-taking. As one panelist said, he'd never really thought about it in ethical terms before. He thought about risk almost as like the weather. It's just always with you, and you just have to decide whether to sort of put up your umbrella or not. But actually, there is an ethical side to risk-taking, because when you are in a position of power, the risks you take aren't just affecting you and a small group around you, they are affecting a huge number of people, which is why, coming back to finance, some of the risks taken on by the world's biggest banks, and indeed some sovereign states, were, we can now see, thoroughly irresponsible, not just for themselves, but for so many millions of people who were caught up in that risk-taking venture.
As an expert on Middle Eastern affairs, will the events of the Arab Spring give rise to stable democracies in that region?
Well, we hope so. I'm about to go actually to a working session on Syria and the future of Syria, so I'm looking forward to that. I think we can only, in the end, say that it's going to take years to really understand where the Arab Spring is taking the Arab world. I would say, having spent many years living in the Middle East, that it is ultimately a great positive to see the peoples of the Arab world beginning to lose their fear of authoritarian regimes and to demand basic freedoms, the sorts of freedoms that we in the West take for granted. But clearly, as we've seen in Syria, and maybe we've seen in other parts of the Middle East too, taking to the streets, expressing a desire for change and for freedom is very different from actually achieving it and achieving stability as well. I think, to take Syria as one example, it could take many years for the process to work itself out. But I would come back to the point that it has got to be a positive that at least the process has begun.
Last year you announced to quit business predictions due to recent dismal performance on that field. Nevertheless, could you tell us what topics will be on the agenda of the Gallen Symposium 5 years from now?
That's very unfair. I did promise I would get out of the predictions business, but just one thought that derives from the Arab Spring. I think this human desire for greater freedom, to find more space in which people can express opinion and direct their own lives, I think it's going to go way beyond the Arab world. I mean, it's obvious already that, authoritarianism as a mode of governance is going to face long-term challenge in, for example, Russia, in China, in a whole host of countries that matter hugely to the future of the world. And I suspect that 5 years from now, we talk a lot about the Chinese economic miracle and the Chinese economic impact upon the globe. I think we might be talking more about a state of flux in Chinese politics 5 years from now, and how we and the rest of the world need to react to that.
Mr. Sackur, thank you very much for your statements and enjoy your time here at the St. Gallen Symposium.
You're most welcome. I'm already enjoying it. Thank you very much.